Government motion. Proposed resolution moved by the Secretary for Financial Services and the Treasury under the Loans Ordinance. Members who wish to speak, please press the Request to Speak button. I now call upon the Secretary for Financial Services and the Treasury to speak and move the motion. Secretary. President, I hereby move the proposed resolution on the agenda pursuant to Section 3(1) of the Loans Ordinance. The proposed resolution seeks to approve the government to borrow for the purposes of the Capital Works Reserve Fund sums not exceeding in total $900 billion or equivalent for the Infrastructure Bond Program and the Government Sustainable Bond Program. The existing borrowing ceiling for government bonds is $500 billion. In the 2026-27 budget, the Financial Secretary announced that the total borrowing ceiling of the two bond programs would be raised from $700 billion announced last year to $900 billion. The GSBP was set up in 2018 to promote green finance. The IBP was established in 2024 to finance government's public works projects. The funds raised under the two bond programs are credited to the Capital Works Reserve Fund to finance eligible public works projects and sustainable projects. Infrastructure projects represent our investment in Hong Kong's future. The government is accelerating the development of the Northern Metropolis, as well as public works projects relating to the economy and people's livelihood, to promote economic growth, create job opportunities, attract talents, and enhance the long-term competitiveness and improve people's quality of living. The policy address last year announced that the government would earmark an additional $30 billion in the next 2 to 3 years to increase expenditure on works projects for driving sustained economic development. The government's capital works expenditure in 2025-26 and 2026-27 is estimated to be about $125 billion and $128 billion respectively, and will remain at a similar level during the medium-range forecast period. Land revenue has all along been a primary funding source for CWRF. However, adjustments in the property market in recent years has sharply reduced land premium receipts and in turn reduced the CWRF balance. To prevent infrastructure developments from being constrained by fluctuations in land revenue, we propose raising the borrowing ceiling to increase our capacity to finance infrastructure developments, thereby enabling better management of cash flow needs of major infrastructure projects. We propose raising the borrowing ceiling from the existing level of $500 billion to $900 billion. Raising the borrowing ceiling enhances flexibility in bond issuance. As public works projects are long-term investment, we plan to issue more long-term bonds, thereby increasing net proceeds and to align more closely the cash flow duration with project requirements. Issuing government bonds is one of the public financial management tools. Issuing bonds to support infrastructure development is a common practice worldwide. As long as the amount of bond issuance is contained at a level that ensures fiscal prudence, capital can be utilized flexibly and for investing in future economic development, bringing greater returns and benefits to the society. If the motion is passed, the government will issue about $160 billion to $220 billion worth of bonds per annum from 2026-27 to 2030-31. The ratio of government debt to GDP will rise from 14.4% to 19.9%, which is a highly prudent level and well below that of most advanced economies. As we pledged before, the bond proceeds will be used to invest in infrastructure only, but not for government recurrent expenditure, so as to uphold our fiscal discipline. Arrangements of the two bond programs, such as the bond issuance parameters and the selection of individual projects supported by the bond proceeds, will be determined based on government financial conditions, market response, and works progress at the time of issuance, and will be subject to approval by the steering committee chaired by the FS. President, raising the borrowing ceiling to $900 billion will enable us to leverage market resources for implementing works projects that drive Hong Kong's long-term development and improve people's livelihood, while ensuring the Northern Metropolis and other strategic infrastructure projects proceed on schedule. I urge members to support the passage of this resolution. Thank you.
Now propose the question to you that the motion moved by the Secretary be passed. Dr. Junius Ho. President, in my capacity as the chairman of this committee on proposed resolution under Section 3(1) of the Loans Ordinance, I report to the Legislative Council on the main deliberations of the subcommittee. The purpose of the proposed resolution is to seek the approval of the Legislative Council to increase the borrowing limit for the infrastructure bond program and the government sustainable bond program from $500 billion to $900 billion for the purposes of the Capital Works Reserve Fund. Given the uncertainties in global interest rate trends, members have inquired how the administration assesses the impact of interest expenses over the next 5 years, as well as the interest cost involved in issuing long-term bonds on the sustainability of public finances. Members also asked whether the administration, after raising the borrowing limit to $900 billion, would consider establishing a government debt risk indicators or setting a cap on the government debt to GDP ratio as a control mechanism for government debt levels to ensure long-term fiscal sustainability. The administration stated that the interest expenses for bond issuance in 2026-27 are estimated to be approximately $16.6 billion, equivalent to 0.5% of GDP between the 2027-28 and 2030-31 financial years. While the interest rates will depend on market conditions, the administration estimates that the annual interest expenses will remain below 1% of GDP, representing a very minor impact on public finances. Members expressed concern over whether the proceeds from bond issuances are put to good use and urged the government to regularly report to the Legislative Council on the issuance and application of funds under various bond programs. The administration responded that all public works projects funded by the CWRF must be approved by the Finance Committee. Therefore, there is no question of the government circumventing LegCo's scrutiny. To enhance the Legislative Council's understanding of the progress of these programs, and in response to the subcommittee's views, the government is actively considering providing half-yearly reports to the Panel on Financial Affairs regarding the issuance and use of funds under the two bond programs starting from 2026-27 financial year. Members also discussed various matters, including the expenditure, financing options, and economic benefits of infrastructure projects in the Northern Metropolis, as well as increasing opportunities for retail investors to invest in infrastructure bonds. President, the following are my personal views on the proposed resolution. First, we should not borrow easily. Government is not regular business enterprises. The government should be prudent in spending. They should abide by Article 107 of the Basic Law. They should not borrow just because of low interest rate. When the interest rate increase, the burden shouldered by the government will be heavier. When you borrow money, you have to make repayment after all. Second, we should not spend easily. The borrowing limit will be raised from $500 to $900 billion. That's an 80% increase. We should abide by the bottom line mindset. We should be prudent in spending, control on expenditure. That's to ensure the long-term sustainable development of Hong Kong. The subcommittee members support the resolution cautiously. Thank you. Also submit Mr. Chen Chen-ying. President, infrastructure projects is the foundation for a city's development. We need to set aside enough resources to make sure that there is high-quality development of infrastructure. We should also be forward-looking and direct resources to green projects. In the next 5 years, we are going to consolidate lands in the Northern Metropolis. We need stable flow of capital. I know that the revenue of the government is restrained over the past few years. In order to garner enough capital for infrastructure projects, I support raising the borrowing limit for IBP and GSPP from $500 to $900 billion. But regarding the implementation, I have some concerns and suggestions. First, on the timing of bond issuance. The scale of the longer-term bond will be increased in the future. Overall speaking, in order to cater to uncertainties such as inflation, the yields of long-term bonds is usually higher than short-term bonds. At the same time, we implement a linked exchange rate system. The bond rate, especially USD-denominated bond, will be impacted by external market and the rate of Federal Reserve. The government last Friday announced the issuance of green bonds and infrastructure bonds valued at $27.6 billion. The shortest tenor is 5 years, longest is 30 years. The scale is 2 times of that of last year. The interest rate is 3.95%. Subscription is 8.6 times. Having considered the sustainability of finance and the repayment of interest rate, it is important that we control the timing of bond issuance. When we issue bonds when the interest rate is low, that will alleviate the interest rate expenditure of the government. At the same time, we should consider the fluctuations of GDP. The debt to GDP ratio of our government is very crucial to the financial health of the place. By raising the borrowing limit, the debt to GDP ratio will rise to 19.9%. Although that's below the level of most advanced economies, GDP is a dynamic indicator. I asked in the subcommittee meeting how the government is going to control the debt to GDP ratio. Hong Kong's economy is highly external oriented. We are heavily impacted by a global market. Given the heightened geopolitical tensions, we are extremely sensitive to fluctuations in the trading situation in the world and the oil prices and fuel prices. So the government need to have regards to all these factors. In the first quarter this year, our GDP grew by 5.9%. That's a strong growth. So perhaps this is the time that we expand the scale of bond issuance. Objectively speaking, the Northern Metropolis is may potentially be delayed in terms of its construction. So I think that the government should set aside buffer room. For idle fund, it may be invested in other short-term projects to improve our cash flow. Third, we need to keep up with the trend of digitalization and tokenization. Hong Kong is the largest offshore renminbi bond issuance market and the largest green bond issuance center in Asia. The government issued a $10 billion $10 billion bond. The subscription is 13 times. That was very popular. So I think that we need to increase the scale of issuance of tokenized bond to offer more options for investors, lower transaction costs, and enhance the settlement capabilities and efficiency of bond issuance. This is also how we can enhance transparency of our market. I think that by fundraising, we can further fund more infrastructure and sustainable projects in Hong Kong. I support the resolutions under the Loans Ordinance. I so submit. Mr. Chan Pui-Leung. Thank you, President. I speak in support of the proposed resolution under the Loans Ordinance to implement the proposal in the budget to raise the borrowing limit for the infrastructure bond program and the government sustainable bond program from $500 billion to $900 billion. Public works projects rely on funding from Capital Works Reserve Fund, and the balance and income of the fund rely on land revenue. However, due to the decline in land revenue, the balance of CWRF have decreased. Over the past 3 financial years, the annual revenue was less than $20 billion. That's far lower than the peak of land revenue at $140 billion. Now the cash flow demand for infrastructure projects in the Northern Metropolis is increasing. It rose from $86 billion to $124.8 billion. Over the next 5 years, we have to spend $128 billion per year on the Northern Metropolis. The balance of the CWRF may not be able to support that. So we need to increase the scale of bond issuance. I have always supported this idea of issuing bonds to invest in the future. After raising the borrowing limit to $900 billion, the debt to GDP ratio is still as low as 14.7%. Even for the medium range estimates, the ratio is at 19.9% still. That's far lower than other advanced economies such as Japan, Singapore, and the U.S. Their debt to GDP ratio is sometimes more than 100%. All the funds raised by the bond issuance will be spent on infrastructure projects instead of recurrent expenditure. So I support the idea, and I thank the governments for adopting the suggestions from the trade. The preferential policy package will be extended now to not just general insurance companies, but also insurance companies in other fields. This will enhance our competitiveness. During the scrutiny period, I said that general insurance companies as the major stakeholders should be given more options. I think that the government should issue bonds in different denominations, such as those denominated in the USD. Currently, the tenor of infrastructure bonds is usually less than 7 years. I hope that the government will issue longer-term bonds that with a tenor of more than 10 years to cater to the long-term asset allocation needs of different insurance companies. Apart from raising funds by issuing bonds, the government need to introduce market forces to implement infrastructure projects. So for some projects, I support the government in adopting BOT model under the private-public partnership. Under the BOT model, we can achieve efficiency, and this is how we can speed up the development in the Northern Metropolis. I so submit.
Mr. Johnny Ng. The government has proposed this resolution under the Loans Ordinance to raise the borrowing ceiling of the two bonds under this the fund from $500 billion to $900 billion so as to expedite the development of the Northern Metropolis and other public works related to the economy and people's livelihood. Through raising the borrowing ceiling, we can provide flexible, sustainable financing channel for the public works projects. I think this is reasonable, and in principle, I support the resolution. I think that we should spend our money wisely. We still face a risk of a fiscal deficit, so we need to suitably invest in the future, especially in our country's 15th five-year plan. There are calls for making innovation, technology, green development, smart economy into the core engines of our economy. We must also suitably invest in infrastructure and developing human capital so as to enhance our productivity and return rate. We can create the prerequisite for sustainable financial development. The Northern Metropolis is our major driving force. We need to expedite the development of the Northern Metropolis. We need the government to put in more resources and attract investors to invest in the Northern Metropolis. Now, I think this resolution seeks to align our policies with the 15th five-year plan to support the overall development direction of Hong Kong. I think that comparing to other advanced economies, the debt to GDP ratio of Hong Kong remains low. is far lower than the other advanced economies. Now, after raising funds through bond issuance, we must make sure optimal use of resources to drive infrastructural development and economic development in Hong Kong. The government should issue bonds of a longer tenor to meet the needs. Northern Metropolis is a mega project. We need funds to support its development. The government must therefore draw up effective and diversified financing channels. We should also adopt different development models and foster public-private partnership so that we can combine a capable government with efficient market, so that we will not rely too heavily on the government borrowing, because this will lead to burden on the public coffers in the longer term. The government should also ensure transparency when it comes to use of the funds. Works should be monitored. Information should be released in the public domain, including the relevant expenditure of the NM project as well as the cost-benefit analysis. Regular reports should be made to the Legislative Council on the bond issuance situation and the utilization of funds. I expect the SAR government to make annual reports to the Legislative Council on bond issuance and use of funds, so that the public understand that we're really using public money in an optimal manner. Mr. Kasif Tam. Thank you, President. I speak in support of this resolution made under the Loans Ordinance to raise the borrowing ceiling from $500 to $900 billion so as to expedite the development of Northern Metropolis and other works relating to people's livelihood. The Northern Metropolis is a new economic driver. It is also a very important tool to realize innovation, technological, industrial transformation, and integration, collaboration with the Greater Bay Area. Northern Metropolis is also part of the National 15 Five-Year Plan. We're going to kickstart projects relating to the Northern Metropolis University Town and other railway projects, and the works involve site formation, the construction of roads, infrastructure. We're going to enter the peak period when it comes to works expenditure. It's expected to reach $128 billion in the face of a global uncertainty in interest rate and adjustments in the property market. In recent years, the government's land sale program has not come in very good income. So I think that the government should suitably raise the borrowing ceiling so as to cushion the impact brought about by the external economic uncertainties. This will hamper the long-term development strategy in Hong Kong. Of course, many countries are now experiencing a debt crisis, and I fully appreciate the public's concern. The government should explain its position to the public so that they understand that the debt to GDP ratio in Hong Kong remains an extremely low level, and we're very robust. Now, it's expected that this ratio will be maintained at about 20%, even if we raise the borrowing ceiling to $900 billion, and that's far lower than the same in Japan and Singapore. The government should continue to lobby the support of the public to reassure them. The government should also invest in the future when it comes to raising funds through bond issuance, and not to add to the burden of the next generation. In a more precise manner, the resources should be spent on infrastructure projects that can create jobs and enhance productivity so as to meet the housing needs and other livelihood needs of the people, and expedite the development of industries and businesses so as to generate greater value for our land and overall economic benefits. We should improve the government's fiscal position. Apart from addressing public concern, the government should also explain to the public and to encourage participation in, say, the retail bond program. In a relatively low-interest environment, the government should roll out bonds of a longer tenor to support public works projects and give the public a more robust investment option that can give them reliable return. Through participating in the Northern Metropolis development, members of the public will not only be the spectator, they will be the investors and the participants. This will drive a sense of belonging among the public so that the public shares the fruit of success of Northern Metropolis. Apart from investment and bond issuance, I think the government should also leverage on market forces and draw up policy support. The government should be a good steer. This is done through improving regulations, streamlining administrative procedures, and creating an innovative financing framework so that we can leverage on market forces and foster public-private partnership. We can foster in situ land exchange and also adopt the large-scale land disposal approach so as to expedite the development. I hope that by raising the borrowing ceiling, we can really expedite the development of Northern Metropolis so that members of the public can enjoy the success. So submit. Mr. Bill Tang, President. I am speaking on behalf of the FTU in relation to this proposed resolution moved by the administration under the Loans Ordinance. I'd like to give our support. We agree that the borrowing ceiling should be increased from $500 to $900 billion for expediting the development of Northern Metropolis. We know that investing in infrastructure can help us lay a good foundation to tackle future challenges. In the short term, we must not shun the issue of the revenue shortfall for the Capital Works Reserve Fund. There is a practical need to raise the borrowing ceiling. The FTU fully supports this decision. We appreciate the rationale. However, we must adopt a more visionary approach to review the strategic positioning of bond issuance in Hong Kong. Bond issuance, especially government bond programs, should not be regarded only as a financing tool for infrastructure development. It is also an opportunity for Hong Kong for consolidating our position as an international financial center. We can promote, for example, green finance, sustainable finance. The FTU is of the view that the government should realize all these strategic goals through bond issuance. And by raising the borrowing ceiling, we can also help promote the development of the financial market in Hong Kong. For many years, we have been over-reliant on the equity market. International investors have increasing demand for fixed income or FICC products. We have the prerequisites, and we also have a market deep enough to develop the bond market. Together with credit rating services, the government should study the possibility of issuing bonds of a longer tenor and improve the yield curve in the long run so as to attract more investors to take part in the process. Now, apart from raising the borrowing ceiling, the FTU urges the government to draw up a clear roadmap on the development of the bond market so as to deepen the primary market and support or enhance the liquidity of the secondary market. Some of the bonds are now held in the hands of institutional investors all the way till maturity. We have yet to build a good secondary market that can promote liquidity. The government should grasp on this opportunity whilst expanding the scope of bond issuance. The government should also complete the infrastructure development in the secondary market so as to broaden the category of investors eligible for purchasing bonds and enhancing the sustainability or accessibility of the retail bond market. The government should conduct a study on the secondary market for government bonds. And also we have bonds denominated in renminbi. We can enrich the categories of bond products so as to cater for the needs of international investors. We can provide, for example, high credit rating investment products for them. The government should conduct a study under the existing bond issuance framework, expand the scale and size of renminbi bond issuance so as to further consolidate Hong Kong's status as an offshore renminbi center, and this can also help us meet the goal of serving our country. The last point is about fixed income. Now, for many years, the FTU has advocated for MPF to be able to purchase bonds. For the existing MPF system, the investments are usually concentrated on the well-performing equity funds, but it's subject to market fluctuation. It's difficult to get so-called reasonable return. By reasonable, I mean we should at least be able to cushion the inflation. Now, the FTU urges the government to conduct a review with the MPF authority so as to provide more robust retirement options for employees in Hong Kong. Government bonds should be one option for MPF fund managers so that we have more robust income under the MPF system. The FTU supports this resolution. I hope that upon passage with the government can continue to abide by fiscal prudence and grasp this opportunity.
Mr. Dennis Lau, I speak in support of the proposed resolution under the Loans Ordinance. I noticed that the government debt to GDP ratio will be raised from 14.4% to 19.9%. The government said that this is a highly prudent level. However, after all, we'll have to pay off the debt at some point. The government will have to find ways to refinance the projects if the funds are used up. While I support raising the borrowing limit, I think we have to manage our fiscal position prudently. I agree that infrastructure is a key driver. However, we've seen a drop of land revenue according to statistics from 2018-19 to 2022-23. The yearly land revenue was $112 billion, but the figures dropped to $13 billion in 2024-25. On the contrary, infrastructure cost has been on the rise. From 2018-19 to 2022-23, the average yearly infrastructure cost was $76 billion, and the figure increased to $86 billion in 2023-24. In 2024-25, the figure reached $105 billion. Infrastructure costs are at a record high while we see a continuous drop of land revenue. The government must be prudent so that works projects will not be affected because of the fluctuation in land premium. My worry is that our existing land revenue cannot support the infrastructure cost. The government must find new ways to increase its revenue to support the local construction industry. When time was good, the construction industry could benefit and there wasn't enough manpower. And when we are at bad times, the local construction workers are underemployed. I hope that the construction workers will not be significantly affected because of this resolution. I have the following 3 suggestions. First, the government must continue to improve its revenue source. Apart from issuing bonds, the government must study ways to ensure stable revenue. For example, it should come up with a multi-pronged approach to collect land premium. It is only by ensuring that we can cover the infrastructure cost that we can ensure stable development of the construction industry and attract more young people to join the sector. One reason why young people are not willing to join the industry is that jobs are not stable in the construction industry. So the above suggestion is crucial to attracting new blood. Second, we should continue to monitor the government debt to GDP ratio. The government should adhere to strict fiscal discipline. For example, the government debt to GDP ratio should be set at a cap, and it should report regularly to LegCo about the situation. We should not allow the future generations to bear high loans. Also, the government should adopt an innovative approach. Currently, a lot of works projects are outsourced to different levels of workers, and that increases the costs. The government should study adopting new procurement model. For example, it should apply digitalization as well as MIC construction model, as well as new construction contracts. Also, the government should opt for public-private partnerships as well as new financing tools to avoid being over-reliant on bond issuance. Overall speaking, I agree that the borrowing limit should be increased to $900 billion to avoid any fluctuations or impacts from the unstable land revenue. However, in the long run, we have to adopt new financing models to ensure the stable development of the construction industry and to attract more young people to join the sector. This will also prevent us from borrowing too many loans. Next, Mr. Robert Lee. Deputy President, I support the resolution to raise the borrowing ceiling from the current $500 billion to $900 billion. This will cover the infrastructure bond program as well as the government sustainable bond program. This is to enable government to boost its financing capacity in the Northern Metropolis project so that it won't be affected by the fluctuations of land revenue. From an economic perspective, this is an effective channel, and ensuring multiple financing channels can also foster stability in our financial system, and this can also ensure sustainable economic development. After the passage of the resolution, the government can follow up on the matter in the three following ways. First, the government should explain to the public about the scheme and that it should study allowing MPF funds to invest in bonds. It is expected that in the coming 5 years, the government will issue bonds equivalent to $160 billion. The government debt to GDP ratio will increase from 14.4 to 19.9%, and this is a highly prudent level compared to advanced economies worldwide. According to IMF statistics, in advanced economies, government debt to GDP ratio is about 105%. In Japan and the US, the percentage stand at 207% and 124% respectively. This shows that Hong Kong's debt to GDP ratio is at a low level. There is still room, however, for the government to promote infrastructure investment and diversified financial development. The government should step up publicity efforts and explain to overseas media the robustness of our fiscal position as well as the latest bond issuance situation. The government should undertake that the bond proceeds will not be used to fund government recurrent expenditure to dispel any misconception or misunderstanding. On promoting cross-product collaterals, I am glad that the government is going to roll out a fixed income asset and currency roadmap. The government will study rolling out a one-stop trading infrastructure and foster cross-product collaterals that can be used in both Hong Kong and the mainland. I hope that green products can be incorporated into the scheme. Also, the government will promote retail bonds. The government will reserve part of the bonds for the subscription of retail investors. This will help promote inclusive finance as well as satisfy the needs of the public. At the same time, the government can issue bonds of longer tenures of, for example, 10 to even 15 years to accommodate the cash flow needs for the Northern Metropolis project. The government can consider issuing bonds denominated in RMB to promote the internationalization of renminbi. On the feasibility, the government earlier said that it will issue green bonds, and part of the green bonds will be for investment by MPF scheme members so as to provide an additional investment option for MPF scheme members. I hope MPF managers can invest directly in government bonds, and we should look for ways to track the transaction to ensure overall returns. I so submit. I speak in support of the resolution. Professor Priscilla Leung, Deputy President, I speak in support of the resolution proposed under the Loans Ordinance. I speak in support of raising the borrowing ceiling from $600 billion to $900 billion. Every time I speak on the budget, I mention Basic Law Article 107 and Article 108. They stipulate that the government should maintain a low tax regime and that we have to maintain fiscal balance. I think the bond issuance proposed is in line with the one country, two systems and the healthy operation of the market. Back in 2017, I told the FS that the economic environment around the world would be very poor. And finally, we are seeing a return of surplus. However, the surplus we gain is not enough to cope with the development cost required to develop the digital era as well as to develop the northern metropolis. We cannot have the best of both worlds. We have to take care of people's livelihood needs and at the same time ensure infrastructure development. I said many times that the government has been quite conservative in terms of its scale of bond issuance. If you look at Singapore, it does not suffer from any fiscal deficit. Its constitution also requires it to maintain fiscal balance. However, the bond issuance amount to about 13,000 trillion dollars, Singaporean dollars. In Singapore, the Central Provident Fund will have to participate in the bond program. This is because the Central Provident Fund in Singapore is managed by the government. I think moving forward, we'll have to monitor closely the usage of bond proceeds and the role to be played by the government in bond issuance. The Northern Metropolis project will spend 10 to 15 years. Many investors wonder what will NM look like in the coming 5 to 10 years. If we do not have enough money or capital, then the government may not be able to implement the project effectively. I am confident that the NM will be a successful project. NM will definitely be a highlight of our 5-year plan. We talk about credible blueprints. We have to offer these blueprints to local and overseas investors. In the long run, we have to encourage government officials in charge of the project to be bold. We need to come up with a mechanism to ensure the success of this project. We have to factor in what happens in the external environment, including the war that's going on. In Shanghai, Pudong, they have this mechanism in place to ensure rapid development. We can be another Pudong and we can even be another Shanghai. However, without capital, how can we take forward the project? Issuing bonds is not just about loans. When we purchase properties, we may take out mortgage from the bank, and we have to have good credit ratings in order to take out mortgage from the bank. This is about our integrity. In a free market, we should not be too conservative when we look at bond issuance. If bond issuance constitutes long-term investment, that would lead to a win-win situation. My view is that $900 billion is not a lot. In the future, if necessary, the government may even consider issuing bonds in a targeted manner for a specific project. We have to ensure that investors can enjoy the dividends, so I speak in support of the resolution.
Ms. Carmen Khan. President, I'm a member of the subcommittee to the resolution. I support this resolution. The purpose of the resolution is to raise the borrowing limit of IBP and GSBP from $500 billion to $900 billion. The administration explained to the subcommittee that the change means that the unrepaid principal at any time should not exceed $900 billion. It does not mean that the government should not issue bond over $900 billion in a cumulative manner. What does it mean? It means that the debt to GDP ratio of the government will be at 19.9%. That's far lower than other advanced economies in the world. In Singapore, the relevant ratio is 176%, US 125%. So it shows that the Hong Kong's debt to GDP ratio is still at a very prudent level. I have a few suggestions. By raising the borrowing limit, we are to invest in the future. In the budget last year, the government proposed to raise the borrowing limit from $500 to $700 billion. Why was the resolution not needed? Well, as the administration explained, this is a rolling concept. As long as the unrepaid principal does not exceed $500 billion, then a resolution is not needed. The administration undertake that the fund raised by issuing bonds will be used for infrastructure projects, but not to repay recurrent expenditure of the government. According to the resolution to establish the WRF in 1982, the financial secretary has the right to transfer the unspent balance to the government to cover recurrent expenditure. Previously, land revenue of the government was high and the infrastructure as well as public works project was not expensive. That's why the balance of CWRF was high. However, because of the decline in land revenue, the government need to adopt a change in the mindset to invest in the future. And I also think that the government should take this opportunity to develop a primary and secondary bond market. Second, the bond issuance to tie in with our demand. I always said that the tenor of the bond should complement with that of long-term capital need. According to the government's midterm estimates, half of the bonds will be used for refinancing. So 50% of the fund raised by bond issuance will be spent on infrastructure projects. This year, the government issued bond of $160 billion, net proceeds $100 billion. Next year, the government will issue bonds of $210 billion, net proceeds $80 billion. On the 8th of May, the government issued bonds denominated in four different currencies. That is equivalent to $27.6 billion. 750 European dollars will be spent on green bonds. The rest will be spent on infrastructure projects. That's as high as 77%. The financial secretary said that the interest rate for longer-term bonds is higher. Generally speaking, this is correct, but I think that the government should make good use of the price negotiating advantage of Hong Kong, and we should increase the scale of renminbi-denominated bonds and improve the yield curve of renminbi to internationalize the renminbi. Half of the bond issued is renminbi-denominated bonds, and the interest rate is as low as 2.6%. The subscription is 8.6 times. It shows that there is great demand. Third, the publishing of annual reports of the two bond program is very often delayed, and I thank the administration for coming to the panel on financial affairs to report to us the spending on the bond program half yearly. so that the electrical knows how the fund raised by the bond program is spent. And I remind the Development Bureau's PGSO to monitor the progress of the bond issuance. Ms. Nixie Lam, thank you. I support the government raising borrowing ceiling from $500 to $900 billion for IPP and GSBP. Hong Kong is developing the Northern Metropolis and other large-scale infrastructure projects in full speed. By issuing bonds, we can finance these large-scale infrastructure projects. Northern Metropolis is the new driving force for high-quality development of Hong Kong. It accounts for 1/3 of our territory. It can accommodate 2.5 million people, providing 3,000 hectares of developable land. This will address the shortage of public and private housing supply. There are many traffic, transport, housing-related projects. There are many development areas in the Northern Metropolis. We're also going to have a sentient technopole. We are farming land for them. We are building infrastructures and public facilities for these new development areas. All these need stable input of capital. By raising the borrowing limit, we can finance the establishment of the Northern Metropolis and thus beneficial to the long-term development of our city. The governments undertake that the proceeds from the bond issuance will be spent on infrastructure projects. By raising the borrowing limit, the debt to GDP ratio will be increased by less than 2%. Compared to US, UK, and Japan, where the debt to GDP ratio is over 100%, I think that the Hong Kong's debt to GDP ratio is still at a very healthy level. There are concerns regarding the increase in borrowing level. I know that with more infrastructure projects, we need more capital. Starting from May 2024, the government applied to raise the borrowing limit multiple times from $200 to $900 billion. That is, in 2 years' time, the borrowing limit have been increased by fourfold. Given the unstable geopolitical landscape and uncertainties in our economic prospect, I hope that the government will conduct a regular review of the borrowing limit to make sure that the borrowing limit will not be raised indefinitely. And I know that the government will adopt a diversified financing model, and I hope that the government will go for a public-private partnership model to leverage market forces to lower the government's direct investment on infrastructure projects. And I hope that the government will make sure that they repay the debt to make sure that our loan burden will not be transferred to our people. President, we need to grasp the opportunities for sustainable development. By raising the borrowing limit, we can speedily develop the Northern Metropolis and ensure our competitiveness. I hope that the government will uphold financial discipline and make good use of our public money to promote the development of the Northern Metropolis. This is how we can create a new driving force for our economy so that people can benefit. Thank you. Mr. Alan Chan. Thank you, President. I support the proposed resolution under Section 3(1) of the Loans Ordinance moved by the Secretary for Financial Services and the Treasury. We're raising the borrowing ceiling from $500 to $900 billion. According to Article 107 of the Basic Law, the government has to uphold fiscal discipline. In 2019, the revenue generated from land auction account for 26.6% of our revenue. 2025, the same figure dropped to 2.5%. So that's a drop of 23% in terms of revenue from land auction. Then where does our money come from? I think that this shows that our financial structure is more livelihood-based. We understand now that we cannot rely solely on land sale and land auction. And we also have to adjust our industry policies for Northern Metropolis. We need to invest properly. Should we borrow to invest or cover expenditure? If we borrow to cover welfare policies, then that's an expenditure. If we borrow to invest in the future, that's an investment. We are at the fourth industrial revolution. The first industrial revolution happened in the UK. The second time is about electricity and lighting. The third is about chip, and now is at we're at the AI industrial revolution. We know that during the industrial revolution, technology and productivity improve exponentially. If we miss out on the opportunity to invest in the Northern Metropolis, then there will no longer be a next generation. Every countries are fighting to purchase chips to develop their artificial intelligence. Hong Kong is sitting on 260 billion US dollar of bonds. If we don't make use of it to invest, then we're not making good use of our resources. By raising the borrowing ceiling, the debt to GDP ratio is just at 19.9%. That's far lower than other advanced economies and international financial centers in the world. In Japan, the debt to GDP ratio is 229.6%. That's 11.5 times higher than us. Singapore, 175.6%, 8.8 times higher than us. US, 125%, 6.3 times higher than our ratio. We should not just look at the debt we have. We should look at whether we can upgrade our industries and generate long-term income by raising bond. According to Boston Consulting Group 2025 financial report, Hong Kong's cross-boundary wealth and asset level is as high as 2.7 trillion US dollars. That's the same as Switzerland. In 2019, we're going to bypass Switzerland to become the largest wealth and asset management center. Hong Kong has stocks and equities, but we don't have bond. We need to consider a systematic risks system. How can we develop our bond market? There are 4 ways to do that. First, the government should issue longer-term bonds of tenors more than 10 years, 20 years, so that the cash flow period will meet the development period of the Northern Metropolis. At the same time, we need to establish a more comprehensive yield curve for renminbi. Second, we need to attract sovereign wealth funds to make use of Hong Kong to issue bonds such as renminbi denominated and green bonds. Third, we need to make sure that everyone participate in the bond market. The government should consider issuing more silver bonds. We should allow people to invest in this bond through MPF. Fourth, the government should report to the Legislative Council regularly the use of the fund raised by bond issuance, the repayment interest, and economic benefits.
Mr. Peter Shiu. Thank you, President. The Liberal Party and myself support this proposed resolution. The government seeks to increase the borrowing ceiling to $900 billion. I think it's common knowledge that since the Black Hat violence and COVID, the fiscal position has changed. Our public coffers used to be flush with cash. The government made a lot of efforts to help to tide the public and SMEs over the difficulties. So as such, we are at a very different fiscal position now. And as mentioned by other members, in the past few years, our land sale income has dropped drastically. Things have improved a bit recently, but still there is a drop of revenue, and we don't have sufficient funds to support mega projects such as the Northern Metropolis. In fact, the chief executive has mentioned more than once that this is imminent for us. We do need to put in resources to support the Northern Metropolis. It's 1/3 the size of Hong Kong. And a lot of stakeholders are involved, including property developers. But who should take the lead? We cannot just sit on our hands and do nothing. Like Professor Priscilla Leung said, it may not be sufficient even after raising the borrowing ceiling to $900 billion. But we're talking about investment. Like Mr. Alan Chan said, we're not borrowing to cover expenses. So the Liberal Party and myself support this resolution. I've heard the points made by members who have spoken today. I see that there is majority support, except Dr. Junius Ho, who raised concerns about overborrowing. In fact, I discussed this topic with the sector and with the public, and there are indeed concerns. The support is not unanimous. There are concerns, for example, about overborrowing and our inability to repay in the future. Well, I think it's entirely normal for Dr. Junius Ho to express the dissenting views which he collected from the community. So I really appreciate the words uttered by Dr. Junius Ho. After raising the borrowing ceiling to $900 billion, we really need to be careful about how money is to be used, because we need to be mindful about the pace of development and the cost involved. In fact, we don't fare as well when we come to these things comparing to the mainland. Now, apart from using our reserves, we are also raising funds through borrowing. So we need to be very careful how money is spent to make sure that it's well spent. Another point is that I heard from friends that they would like to be able to buy these government bonds as well. There are criticisms about the MPF system. So is it possible for the MPF to include government bonds as well? Allow the fund managers to purchase government bonds, because it's almost a guarantee the government will definitely repay. So it's better than placing a deposit in the bank with almost no interest at all. So we will closely monitor the situation, and on bond issuance, please make sure that the scope can be cast as wide as possible. I think members of the public would like to participate in the development of Northern Metropolis as well. I'm going to cast my supporting vote, and we need to be careful about what Dr. Junius Ho said.
Does any other member wish to speak? If not, I now call upon the Secretary for Financial Services and the Treasury to reply. Then the debate will come to a close. Secretary. President, I thank members for supporting this resolution, which raises the combined borrow ceiling of the IBP, the Infrastructure Bond Program, and the GSBP, the Government Sustainable Bond Program, from the current $500 billion to $900 billion. This will enable the government to make better use of market resources and speed up the development of the Northern Metropolis. I give my special thanks to the subcommittee on the resolution. Here, I will respond to the subcommittee's views. To enhance the scale of bond issuance starting from 2026-27, we will report our progress and the situation to the panel on financial affairs so that members of the public as well as electoral members have a better understanding of our situation. Another issue is about how we can enable greater participation of the public to the bond program. We can give priority to MPF funds to invest in government bonds, so please take note of that. Overall speaking, I hope members will vote in favor of this resolution to raise the borrowing ceiling of the two bond programs. This will boost the government's capacity to finance public works projects. We will speed up the development of the Northern Metropolis and other works projects related to the economy and people's livelihood to strengthen our long-term competitiveness and foster diversified economic growth. I now put the question to you that the motion moved by the Secretary be passed. Will members please proceed to vote? Members, please press the present button. Will those in favor please raise their hands? Those against, please raise their hands. I think the question is agreed by a majority of the members present. I declare the motion passed.